The Hamas terrorist organization has broken the ceasefire in the Gaza Strip in a dramatic way, launching attacks in several sectors in the Gaza Strip. In response, the IDF is carrying out non-stop eliminations of Hamas terrorists across the Gaza Strip, including a group of terrorists who tried to escape from the tunnels in Rafah. The Hamas terrorist organization announced the end of the ceasefire, while Israeli officials announced that the ceasefire will not collapse, but there will be a harsh response to any Hamas violations. Meanwhile, right under Hamas's nose, the United States has begun establishing the new Palestinian city in Gaza. International teams are sketching Gaza's future, including the incoming multinational force, the first of its kind in the world. Hamas is furious with Qatar, while Israel is prepared to renew the fighting and is not sure that the United States understands. And at the same time, there were flare-ups of fighting in southern Lebanon over the weekend, and in Iran, the regime is helpless to address the growing water crisis, but it's moving aggressively to replenish its stockpiles of ballistic missiles and also drones, while a UNESCO World Heritage Site is engulfed in flames and the Ayatollah regime begs for help to put it out. And speaking of fires, sparks are beginning to fly between the United States and the internationally recognized government of Lebanon as Hezbollah's future hangs in the balance. This is all happening while Israel continues to systematically destroy and target Hezbollah infrastructure in Lebanon. Welcome to Boots on the Ground. I'm your host, Yair Pinto. With me today is Mati Shoshani, and together we're bringing you all the truth about what is happening in Israel. So let's quickly go over today's headlines before we dive into the details. Hamas, the terrorist organization, broke the ceasefire and tried to attack IDF troops, while the terrorist organization informed White House Special Envoy Steve Witkoff that the ceasefire agreement has ended and that as far as they're concerned, they are ready to fight, adding that Gaza will not be Lebanon. However, Israeli officials say that they have received no such official notice, but as a result of the violations, Israel launched a sequence of eliminations of terrorists and terror infrastructures in the Gaza Strip over the weekend. Additionally, all 17 terrorists who tried to escape from the tunnels in the area beyond the Yellow Line, which is under Israeli control, were eliminated or captured in the last 24 hours. And amidst all of this kinetic action, Hamas is reportedly furious with the patron, Qatar, and will take you behind the scenes of the dramatic day of fighting inside the Gaza Strip. In the IDF, they identified ongoing violations in both Lebanon and in the Gaza Strip, while Iran is also trying to rehabilitate its ballistic missile program and may attack. In the northern arena, the IDF struck Hezbollah targets at least 16 times in the Bekaa Valley over the weekend and is quietly working to establish a shadow infrastructure in Lebanon. TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani will bring us a look at all the information on the cracks in the relationships as the United States and Lebanon go head-to-head over Hezbollah's future. Relations between the United States and Lebanon are tense amidst concerns over the restoration of Hezbollah's power and the use of the port of Tripoli for smuggling. This is all happening as Washington doubts the country's abilities to neutralize its weapons and maintain a ceasefire. And meanwhile, Iran's leaders have chosen a suicide path. But how much do they really threaten Israel? Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is gaining confidence and calls Israel a cancerous growth that must be removed. And amidst increasing reports of the restoration of the military capabilities of Iran, but all of this hides a deep crisis that the Iranians are suffering from. Iran's water shortages have reached a point of catastrophe as mega cities are drying up and there's nowhere for their residents to go. Lakes and rivers are disappearing and agriculture is failing, leading to massive internal migration, salt storms, and implications of the entire Middle East. And over the weekend, another symptom of the crisis emerged as Iran's leaders appealed to the world for assistance in putting out a massive fire in the northern part of the country that threatens ancient forests along the Caspian Sea, designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So we have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, with me is Mati Shoshani, and together we're bringing you Boots on the Ground, the report that shares all the truth of what's happening in Israel during this war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region that are taking their orders from Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. A moment before we begin, I want to call on all of you to continue and spread the truth with us. Share, follow us, leave a comment, and do not forget to subscribe to TBN Israel on YouTube so that you receive your daily dose of Boots on the Ground. And now, we're getting into the news and starting with an overview of events in the Gaza Strip over the weekend. Israeli officials have declared that they were in full compliance with the ceasefire agreement on Friday when Hamas terrorists began approaching the Yellow Line and firing at the IDF troops that are deployed there. This was a continuation of what's been happening on an almost daily basis for several weeks now, even as Hamas also continued to harm Palestinian civilians in their own zone that they control west of the Yellow Line in the Gaza Strip. As a result, yesterday, on Saturday, Israel launched a sequence of targeted strikes on senior figures of Hamas's terror apparatus. As a result, Hamas informed the American envoys that, for its part, the ceasefire has ended, and they are ready to fight. As reported on Saturday evening by the Saudi news portal El Arabiya, which cited sources familiar with the matter, despite the report, Hamas has not yet published such an official statement. However, according to the report, Hamas clarified to the White House envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, who formulated the agreement to end this war, that the ceasefire must be mutual and Gaza will not be Lebanon, referring to Israel's non-stop strikes against Hezbollah terror targets even after the ceasefire. Despite the Hamas declarations, the IDF announced that a terrorist who crossed the Yellow Line in the Gaza Strip fired at the forces of the IDF and then was eliminated. In addition, 3 terrorists who were besieged in a tunnel in Rafah were eliminated after being identified by an IDF force. According to assessments, these are terrorists who exited the tunnel yesterday and tried to hide in the area, and elsewhere, a vehicle was reportedly hit, leading to the elimination of 4 other terrorists. In another incident, 2 additional terrorists were identified and terminated by the Nahal Infantry IDF Brigade battle team that is operating in the sector. Apparently, they too exited yesterday from a tunnel in eastern Rafah. At noon on Saturday, an armed suspect was identified approaching a post in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip, where reservists from Battalion 7015 under the Southern Brigade Command are stationed. The suspect moved along the humanitarian route exploiting the area and thus managed to approach the force. Upon exiting his vehicle, he opened fire at the force before the fighters returned fire at him and eliminated him. Following this violation, the army launched a series of strikes in Gaza, which included an attempted targeted elimination, whose results are being examined, and also struck additional terrorist infrastructures. As part of their activity to cleanse the area east of the Yellow Line of terrorists, the security forces have been operating with an intensive and significant concentration of efforts in recent weeks in eastern Rafah and the Jenin neighborhood to destroy the subterranean routes and eliminate the terrorists that are staying within the routes in this sector. And in a related story, the Gaza Division's female observers once again proved this weekend how professional they are. Shortly after midnight, one of the observers that are scanning the area noticed suspicious movement above the ground. That was enough for her to alert the command center, and within minutes they guided the forces to close in on the terrorists who exited the tunnel shaft in Rafah until they were destroyed by the Israeli Air Force. Elsewhere, over the weekend, the IDF eliminated at least 6 terrorists who came out of the tunnels at 2 points in the area beyond the Yellow Line in eastern Rafah. 17 terrorists came out of the tunnels, and according to the IDF, about 5 additional terrorists were arrested after they surrendered to the forces and were taken for the Shin Bet interrogation inside Israel. So you may recall that Hamas leaders declared a few weeks ago that there is no such thing as surrender for Hamas. But apparently, not all of their fighters agree with this. And finally, the IDF stated that about 2 hours after the end of Shabbat, Saturday, forces of the Nachal Brigade located and arrested the last terrorists amongst the 17 who exited the tunnel yesterday. Therefore, according to an IDF statement, at the end of a 24-hour manhunt, 11 terrorists were eliminated and 6 were arrested and transferred for further Shin Bet interrogation. This group of terrorists were identified on Friday morning, starting from around 6:30 a.m. as they exited the tunnel, possibly for the purpose of retreating from the area. Intelligence personnel identified them, and after they were attacked in the field, it appears that some managed to return to the tunnel. One terrorist who was captured and arrested stated in his interrogation that with him in the tunnel were about 30 operatives and the remains of another 10 terrorists who were eliminated recently. He added that the operatives went out to look for food and for water. To review, there are an estimated 100 terrorists stuck in tunnels running under the city of Rafah, and the method of dealing with them has been discussed more than once between Israel and the United States. Amongst other things, a compromise was considered under which the terrorists would be expelled, but in the end that compromise did not materialize, perhaps because no country, including Turkey and Qatar, agreed to receive them. In the eastern Rafah area, a network of several subterranean routes remains, in which dozens of Hamas terrorists have been entrenched in recent months. The IDF warns that either they will surrender or they will be eliminated. The forces are working with a concentrated effort and operating by a method of encircling the sector around the terrorists and destroying the terror infrastructures above and below the ground in close cooperation with the Alam Combat Engineering Unit. Israel again calls the mediators to insist that Hamas fulfill its part of this agreement and President Trump's 20-point plan, as Hamas must immediately return the 3 deceased hostages that it still holds, complete the surrender of weapons, and allow the full demilitarization of the Gaza Strip. According to a report in the Saudi news portal El Haddad, Hamas leaders have arrived in Cairo for discussions that are aimed at moving to Phase B of the ceasefire plan, as they appear to understand that their attempts to stall the process have failed and they are out of options. Meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal newspaper reported over the weekend that the Americans are promoting a plan that would effectively color the Gaza Strip in 2 colors, green and red. The area under Hamas control beyond the yellow line would be colored in red, and the area under the IDF control, green. In those green areas, according to the report, the United States is intensifying its efforts to build new communities for Palestinians within the area under Israeli control in the Gaza Strip on the eastern side of the partition line established in the ceasefire agreement that was brokered by President Trump. Furthermore, according to American, Israeli, and Arab sources, American engineering teams are already operating on the ground, removing rubble and unexploded ordnance and preparing the ground for the establishment of the communities, even though actual construction has not yet begun. The move reflects quiet recognition that the disarmament of Hamas and its removal from power, one of the central objectives in the 20-point American peace plan, are not expected to occur soon, but the reconstruction is taking place in order to prevent stagnation and maintain momentum for the ceasefire plan to move forward. The new communities are intended to house Palestinians who were displaced from their homes during the war and to provide them with schools and hospitals until more permanent construction becomes possible. The model is supposed to draw residents away from the area where Hamas continues to rule, thereby reducing its influence over time. Despite a certain rise in Hamas's popularity since the ceasefire, thanks to measures taken to restore order, according to Hamas, as well as the image of standing up to Israel, many Gaza residents still wish to distance themselves from the Hamas rule. So, the first stage of the reconstruction plan will take place in Rafah, which was almost entirely devastated during the fighting. Preparations are still preliminary, and there is also a security risk on the ground. the area is not entirely secure, and a great deal of work remains to be done there. So guys, here at TBN Israel, we will continue to bring you all the truth about what's happening in Israel. So continue to spread it with us. Share, leave a comment, and make sure to subscribe to TBN Israel on YouTube so that you never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. And speaking of boots on the ground, I want to tell you about one of our partners who always have their boots on the ground here in Israel, and that's Magen David Adom. In Israel, emergencies don't wait. One day it's a rocket attack, or a stabbing attack, a car ramming, a baby who is ready to be born, an elderly person having a heart attack, or anything else that you can imagine. These kinds of emergencies have happened anywhere, at any time, and when they do, Magen David Adom is the first to respond. Before the cameras arrive, before the story breaks, they're already there, saving lives, bringing calm to the chaos, and giving people a second chance. But staying ready takes more than just courage. It takes ambulances, medical equipment, trauma supplies, trained volunteers, and armored protection. And all of that takes support. That's where you come in. You can go to savelifeisrael.com and help Magen David Adom stay strong, fast, and prepared so that when the next emergency hits, they're already on their way. Again, that's savelifeisrael.com, and you will help Magen David Adom stay strong, fast, and prepared for any kind of emergency here in the land of Israel. Now, we're getting back into the news and keeping our focus on the Gaza Strip. With no prior intentional model in the entire world, with a bitter lesson from the Unifield's failure in southern Lebanon, and better cautious optimism and slight pessimism, every morning on the third and the top floor of the American Coordination Headquarters in the southern Israeli community of Kiryat Gat, 6 planning and steering teams are meeting up. They include representatives from 21 countries, and they are trying to determine the future of the Gaza Strip. Most are highly motivated, but they are awaiting a decision that will arrive far from Kiryat Gat in Israel. It is clear to everyone that if the plan runs around or is delayed, Hamas will be the winner of this situation. The IDF assessments are that if we will take a few weeks to a few months before the United States is able to establish the multinational force necessary to enter Gaza and disarm Hamas, the key component of Stage B of the ceasefire plan will not take place. So we need this force to happen fast. So while the United Nations legal officials discuss with their counterparts from the United States Central Command, CENTCOM, the authorities of the force, the 6 working groups in Kiryat Gat are discussing and preparing the ground so that it can be observed very quick. They are planning what weapons it will have, precisely where it will operate and under what mandate, how to prevent hostile contact between them and the IDF, and what special communication devices will be used by the foreign soldiers who will land in the Gaza Strip. Even the forces' names is being discussed at the headquarters, as well as the color of the soldiers' uniforms were supposed to replace the IDF fighters, including in the explosive missions of locating many terror tunnels remaining in the Gaza Strip, destroying them, and also collecting weapons by consent or by force for more than 20,000 Hamas terrorists. Tough job. The multinational force, if it is indeed established, and various countries, mainly Muslim, agree to send their soldiers to it, will sit at a base that will be established for it inside the Gaza Strip and not on the Israeli territory. The defense establishments insist on all of this, but the decisions of the countries with which negotiations are being held on this issue will carry weight should they be too concerned for the fate of their own soldiers. In the past week, the Americans decided to reveal to the media what the headquarters will look like in the hope of publicizing the activity. Though mostly theoretical at this point, it will gain a positive momentum and verbal commitments will turn into facts and into actions, and in the meantime, dozens of staffers at the command, some of whom come from countries like Egypt and the United Arab Emirates, Britain and New Zealand, are enjoying the tailwind of the historic decision, 2,803, passed last week in the United Nations Security Council to move towards a new rule in the Gaza Strip without Hamas. The prevailing opinion in Israel's defense establishment regarding Gaza's future is that it is clear to everyone it will include local Palestinian governance under temporary oversight and involvement and assistance from the world, which may need to become a permanent situation. And here, at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on all of these issues, so help us share the truth and make sure to hit the subscribe button so that you never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. And now, we are shifting our focus to the northern arena as the IDF struck at noon on Saturday in waves in southern Lebanon and in the Bekaa Valley. Among those that were eliminated in these strikes was the Hezbollah terrorist Kamel Raze Karnabash. He was hit in the Mifdun area in southern Lebanon as he was engaged in attempts to rehabilitate the organization in this sector. In another strike, the IDF led by Division 91 and via the Air Force, they struck and eliminated a terrorist from the Hezbollah terrorist organization in the Kfar Khula area in southern Lebanon. The terrorist acted as a local representative of the Hezbollah terrorist organization in the Kfar Khula sector. As part of his role, he was responsible for the connection between the organization and the residents of the village on military and economic matters. He also acted to take over private property from terror purposes, but he won't be doing any of that any longer. And meanwhile, the Air Force also struck rocket launchers, ammunitions depots, and other military sites of Hezbollah in the Bekaa Valley and in the south of the country. And according to the El Mayadin network, which is affiliated with Hezbollah, 16 strikes were carried out in the El Bekaa area alone. Other reports claim that the UAV struck a vehicle in the area of the village of Majdel Selm in southern Lebanon. And at the same time, the Lebanese army reported that the army commander Rudolf Haikal held a meeting with senior officials during which he congratulated them on the occasion of Lebanon's Independence Day and expressed hope that all the Lebanese occupied lands will be liberated. So, I want to express my heartfelt agreement to this statement, and I hope that all the parts of Lebanon and other countries in the Middle East which have been occupied and controlled by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps and their proxies and their terrorist armies will soon be returned to the control of more responsible actors and governments. Getting back to General Haikal, the Lebanese National Army's plan regarding the area south of the Litani is progressing according to schedule. He reiterated his claim that Lebanon is committed to the ceasefire agreement and that the army is cohesive. That last part doesn't really track with what we're seeing on the ground in Lebanon recently, but be that as it may, it's time to turn to TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani. So Mati, some analysts are warning that in the very near future we will see fighting in several sectors. On paper, Israel is a state of ceasefire, both with Hamas in Gaza Strip and also with Hezbollah in Lebanon. But in practice, in these two areas, there were also significant strikes over the weekend, including the elimination of senior figures in Hamas's military wing and airstrikes deep inside Lebanon. At the same time, on a third front, the one with Iran, there are also clear signs that Tehran is preparing for the next campaign, and there is concern that another confrontation with the Islamic Republic will break out sooner or later. At the same time, relations between the United States and Lebanon are tense amidst concerns over the restorations of Hezbollah's power and the use of the port of Tripoli for smuggling, as Washington doubts the country's abilities to neutralize its weapons and maintain a ceasefire. So Mati, which way is the wind blowing in the Middle East?
All over the Middle East, ceasefire agreements are being violated, disarmament plans are being stalled and broken. And meanwhile, Israel is on the ground in Syria, Lebanon, and Gaza, and having to try and clean up the mess that is left behind from multiple countries violating the agreements that are taking place. Tonight, on this show, we're going to break down everything that's happening with the ceasefire agreements, with the disarmament plan for both Hamas in the Gaza Strip and Hezbollah in the northern border, and of course, behind the scenes, the Iranian evil overlords that once again are popping up their evil head to try and dramatically, negatively affect the Middle East that we live in. First of all, let's start with the backstory for everything that's happening here. Let me remind you, Israel is right now signed on several ceasefire agreements. in Syria, in Lebanon, and of course in the Gaza Strip. And all of these agreements are leading up to a moment that is supposed to be one, that the forces on the ground that we've been fighting against are disarmed and their power is removed. And secondly, that someone else is built up, propped up as the power in their place. Let's start breaking it down based on regions. The first and biggest issue right now on the table is, of course, Lebanon. Lebanon is a country that has for decades been affected by the terrorist organization Hezbollah. Hezbollah has taken a dramatic blow throughout this war, and right now we're at a place where Hezbollah is slowly supposed to be disarmed by the Lebanese army. And behind the scenes, the US government is supposed to be building up the army of Lebanon, building up the economy of Lebanon, and again, bringing Lebanon back into the fold as a country that is functioning to a certain degree with a working and operating government. But here's the problem. Lebanon and the Lebanese government have had a very hard time, that's of course assuming they were interested in doing this to begin with, in disarming the Hezbollah terrorist organization. How do we know this? Because throughout the sectors in the northern border of Israel, the Israeli army has been encountering time and time again Hezbollah terrorists violating the ceasefire agreement. They're trying to rebuild positions, they're trying to reopen and move weapon stashes from one place to another, and of course the big move is, this is by a report by the US government, there have been funds flooding into Lebanon again to fund Hezbollah fighters by the Iranians. This money and these munitions are coming in various ways, but the bottom line doesn't matter. The bottom line is the same. Hezbollah tries to rebuild itself time and time again, and the Lebanese army and the Lebanese government have struggled to stop them or even slow them down. The end game here, of course, is to completely remove Hezbollah, specifically from southern Lebanon, and replace it with the Lebanese army. But there are several very substantial hurdles in the way. And the first, unsurprisingly, is a financial hurdle. Hezbollah currently pays its fighters, its terrorists, about 3 times more than the Lebanese army. So those people that have been fighting alongside Hezbollah have no incentive to move over to the Lebanese army. And yes, that is how fluid things are on the ground inside Lebanon. It's a question of who's paying you more right now and where you want to put your alliances. Again, the people on the ground there, they don't know where things are going. They don't know whether Hezbollah will disappear or will be there in the months and years to come. And the Lebanese army itself is very hesitant to use force against Hezbollah because it's not truly sure they're able to eliminate or break down their stronghold, specifically in the southern part of the country. And behind this, the US administration onlooks with concern. They've just sent their new ambassador to Lebanon to put substantial pressure on the Lebanese government to really squeeze out Hezbollah, to remove them from power so we can move into the next phase. Because the big issue is this whole ceasefire agreement, this whole deal is put in place for a very clear reason, for Israel to be able to withdraw from Lebanon, and Lebanon once again go back to be operating as a country. And countries need borders that they can protect. Countries need an army that can protect those borders, and countries definitely can't live their lives with a terrorist organization such as Hezbollah fighting within their boundaries. So right now it's all coming together. Israel is putting military pressure in Lebanon. Several times in recent weeks, we've struck against Hezbollah targets deep inside of Lebanon. The reason being, of course, that we had no choice. We're showing them that we cannot move on if the ceasefire is not fully enforced and Hezbollah is not actively being disarmed. And the Lebanese government, they need to see us, the Israeli army, on the ground fighting against Hezbollah to know that the pressure will continue and they have support on the military level. But they also need support by the US administration, and they've been getting plenty of that type of support. Support that's given in diplomatic circles, financial support on the ground, and also a big stick in the sense of external pressure saying, if you don't disarm Hezbollah, we will have a problem. And that problem will require more force, more money, and possibly again sanctions against the country as a whole to make sure Hezbollah is disarmed. So where does Lebanon go? Well, really a lot here depends on the question of funds. Will the US and Israel be able to stop Iranian funds coming in to fund the Hezbollah terrorist organization? And will the Lebanese army and government be strong enough, powerful enough, and determined enough to slowly disarm Hezbollah, build trust within their country, and let their people know that there is an alternative that's a stable government, democratic elections, and hopefully going back to what Lebanon used to be many years ago. And until that point, Israel has no choice but to be strong on the borders, strong with the positions we have inside Lebanon to make sure Hezbollah doesn't dare pop its evil head back up again. And in the meantime, for every infraction, for every time they try to build weapon caches or anti-tank positions or relaunch missiles against Israel, we need to continue striking against them, which is exactly what we've been doing. Shifting gears to what's been going on inside the Gaza Strip. Now let me remind you where things are standing currently. We've had one phase of the ceasefire agreement in which Israel withdraws to what is known as the Yellow Line. That's the IDF forces within the Gaza Strip. That's mostly out of the big city centers, but still holding on to the border areas and a very large security parameter between Israel and the Gaza cities and between Hamas fighters. And Hamas exchanges the hostages. And in the meantime, an international force is supposed to be built up to replace the IDF and keep the peace inside the Gaza Strip. Now here's the big problem with everything that's happening in the Gaza Strip. To rebuild the Gaza Strip, to bring in substantial humanitarian aid beyond just food, to start rebuilding the buildings, the infrastructure, to rehabilitating the people, we need an international stable force that is able to do that without Hamas being involved. If Hamas is allowed to remain in power in the Gaza Strip, well, what is the point of this entire 2-year war up till now? They're the ones who've caused all of this. They're the ones who've been holding their own people in a chokehold for so long, and they must be removed. So sort of the deciding moment in many ways and from many aspects is, will the international community, together with Israel, be able to remove Hamas from controlling the Gaza Strip so substantial humanitarian aid can be brought in? We can rebuild the schools, the facilities, give new opportunities to the people. All of that happens once the ISF, the International Stabilization Force, is active on the ground. And that's sort of the catch-22. We need stability and safety to do that, and Hamas needs to be removed for that stability to exist. And that's where we are today, in this very tenuous moment where Israel's fighting on the ground and preventing Hamas from once again gaining a stronghold, and at the same time, the international organizations need stability without the IDF to be able to rebuild the Gaza Strip. Now here's what's happening behind the scenes in all of these things. We talked about the tension in Lebanon and the violations of the ceasefire. We talked about the ongoing violations of the ceasefire and the disarmament of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Behind all of this, of course, is one evil entity, the Iranian Islamic government in Tehran. They're the ones who started all of this, and they're the ones who continue to pursue violence and continue to pursue their ability to disrupt life in the Middle East. They're once again trying to funnel money into Lebanon, as I previously mentioned. They're the ones trying to get any kind of terrorist attack to take place in Judea and Samaria and within the boundaries of Israel. And they're once again trying to prop up their evil heads through the Houthi proxies in Yemen. But they're doing one more thing. They're trying to once again rebuild their missile abilities. And they don't want just many more missiles, they want many more launchers, because just a couple missiles don't really make any difference for Israel. If we allow the ceasefire violations to continue, the Iranians can once again slowly build up their power, build up their effect, build up their undermining ability in this region to once again destabilize and ruin the beautiful thing that is being built in the Middle East. And what it takes is decisive action. It takes bravery on the side of the Arab and Muslim leaders around us. It takes a very strong ISF in the Gaza Strip. It takes the Lebanese government to remove Hezbollah. It takes the American government to continue putting all the pressure it can on all the governments in all the capitals in this region to just make sure that this deal goes through. And we get to see a Middle East without Iranian influence, with new peace and stability across Israel's borders. This will be good for Israel, and it will of course be very good for the members of these countries, for the people of Lebanon, of Syria, of Gaza. They need something better than what they've had so far, something specifically without Iranian involvement. These next days and weeks are going to determine how the future of the Middle East looks. I'm not being over dramatic. This is truly what is at stake. Will Israel continue to fight on multiple fronts, or will countries be rebuilt, rehabilitated, and stabilized? That is the question at hand. And the next days and weeks are going to determine when this happens and how it happens. Make sure you keep up to date with everything we're releasing, because we're covering these changes on a daily basis. Thank you guys, and be blessed. Now back to Yael Pinto.
Thank you very much, Mati Shoshani, for bringing us your usual clarity to these vitally important issues. And speaking of vitally important issues, We will now move on to reports about the head of the axis of evil in the Middle East, the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps in Iran. But first, I want to remind you that we really need your help. Together, we can spread the truth of what's happening here. So, help us by leaving a comment, liking this content, and by subscribing to TBN Israel on YouTube so that you never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. The news out of Iran in recent weeks is very alarming, and it's also very tragic. More and more threats are being heard from the Iranian regime regarding the restoration of nuclear power and its importance as a deterrence tool, as well as attempts to rehabilitate the ballistic missile production array that is apparently in full swing. There are even reports that the ballistic missile arsenal is being rapidly rebuilt and approaching the numbers that were available to the regime before the 12-day war in June, although analysts were careful to point out that Iran also has to replenish its stocks of launchers, many of which were destroyed by Israeli airstrikes and sabotage during the fighting in June. Missiles cannot be fired without launchers, and these launchers are very sophisticated and complex machines that cost a lot of money and cannot be built very quickly. However, the threats by elements of the Iranian regime are of course directed towards Israel, the IDF, and the senior leadership of the Jewish state. Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who has not tended to appear in public since the war except at exceptional events and with a much lower number of appearances than in the previous time before this war started, seems to be gradually regaining his nerves. This past Saturday, he even again called Israel a cancerous growth in the Middle East and asked to remove it once and for all. Of course, as is his habit, he spoke in the third person, so as not to take direct responsibility for the matter, but as if it would happen by itself, or, in his words, other occasions, many Muslims would raise up against Israel and destroy it without Iran itself being directly involved in it. All of this fiery rhetoric is meant to be frightening and intimidating, and I must say that if I don't know any better, I might be tempted to think that maybe it's true what the regime is saying, that Israel's speculations and strategic success against the war in the 12-day war against Iran wasn't as impressive as it looked. But I do know better, and so do many other people. And I'm sure that includes the senior aides of Ayatollah Khamenei and his military leadership as well. Maybe they aren't telling him the full story because they don't know how he will react. Well, I hope he's watching this video, because here at TBN Israel on Boots on the Ground, we always tell the truth publicly, and Iran's leader needs to know the truth as much as everyone else. So here are some truthful data points about Iran, Israel, and the strategic situation in the Middle East. To start with, Iran's ruling regime has a bad habit which, to be fair, they inherited from previous ruling regimes in the country. This bad habit involves making blatantly false claims about their own strength and their enemies' weaknesses in order to manipulate their own soldiers into taking risks that they might not otherwise take, and also to try and demoralize their enemies. In this day and age, the Iranian regime operates many websites as well as countless accounts on social media networks in order to project an image of power, resources, and almost endless capabilities to deter the enemy and prevent it from thinking about attacks and provocation. But even all of these fake news and nonsense cannot hide the truth. Iran's military is large in numbers, but very weak in terms of equipment, ammunition stockpiles, fuel, and many other things that they'll need to fight a real war. Their air force is still flying planes that were built in the 1970s and the 1980s, including models that literally no other air force in the world still uses. The Iranian Navy is in an even worse shape, and the large ground forces that are driving tanks and trucks that are in some cases more than twice the age of the young men that are operating them. And beyond that, there is the already dire and rapidly escalating environmental crisis in Iran. Over the weekend, this issue got a lot more urgent as the regime officials admitted that they need urgent assistance from neighboring countries to put out a massive forest fire in the north of the country, together with the coast of the Caspian Sea. So this forest, which contains dozens of rare species of plant and animal life, is designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, according to reports in the country's media, and it has been burning out of control for almost a month now. Some reports said that fires were brought under control in early November before flaring up once more, while others say that they were never fully contained. In any case, the extensive nature reserves in northern Iran are once again in a real danger. This is one more indication of the catastrophic drought which is ravaging Iran, leading to water shortages in several major cities, including the capital, Tehran. Tehran is in its 6th consecutive year of drought, and the reservoirs that feed the capital have dropped to the lowest level in decades, and this is according to the reports from Iran. Water rationing has already begun in some neighborhoods, and residents have begun purchasing bottled water due to the concerns that the quality of the tap water is getting worse, and shortages and soaring prices are rising in recent weeks. But now, stores in Tehran have begun limiting customers to 1 pack of 6 mineral bottled waters due to the tightening supply and the rising prices amidst a severe water shortage. Photos from stores uploaded to social media networks showed 1 pack per person signs on 1.5-liter bottles after demand surged. However, the Ayatollah regime has a plan. A recent report by the New York Times revealed that Iran is also strengthening its air defensive systems and planning a massive launch capability, threatening to unleash up to 2,000 missiles at once in the event of another confrontation. An Israeli security official assessed that in such a case, Israel's response would be harsher than in previous rounds. My personal assessment is that the Iranian leadership is delusional and needs to stop believing its own ludicrousy and their absurd rhetoric. Threats never won a war through all human history, especially if the party making the threats wasn't able to back them up. And we know Iran cannot back up the threats that it is making. However, tensions between Tehran and Jerusalem are rising, and Israel is preparing for the possibility of a round of fighting much longer than the last confrontation. According to the assessments, other elements of the Iranian axis, including the Houthis in Yemen, may also participate in the confrontation and launch attacks towards Israel. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development on this issue. So continue spreading the truth, share, follow us, and most importantly, remember that this is a spiritual war. And how do we fight a spiritual war? We pray. So let's unite in prayer for wisdom to our leaders, for the IDF soldiers that are fighting and defending all of us, for our allies, the United States and other countries around the world that want a better future for the people of this region. And I'm talking about the people of Iran, the people of Gaza, the people of Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and other countries. Of course, Israel as well. Let's pray for all these people to have God's peace. Let's pray for the peace of Jerusalem.